Hello and welcome to another episode of From the Beginning here on Heaven and Rethinking. Today we're continuing on in Genesis chapter 48, talking about Manasseh and Ephraim and the blessing that Jacob is going to give him. So let's get right into it, starting in verse 1. Sometime later, Joseph was told, "Your father is ill." So he took his two sons Manasseh and Ephraim along with him. When Jacob was told, "Your son Joseph has come to you," Israel rallied his strength and sat up on his bed. Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and there he blessed me and said to me, 'I am going to make you fruitful and increase your numbers. I will make you a community of peoples, and I will give this land as an everlasting possession to your descendants after you. Now then, your two sons, born to you in Egypt before I came to you here, will be reckoned as mine. Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine. Any children born to you after them will be yours. In the territory they inherit, they will be reckoned under the names of their brothers. As I was returning from Paddan, to my sorrow, Rachel died in the land of Canaan, while we were still on the way, a little distance from Ephrath. So I buried her there beside the road to Ephrath, that is, Bethlehem. When Israel saw the sons of Joseph, he asked, 'Who are these?' 'They are the sons God has given me here,' Joseph said to his father. Then Israel said, 'Bring them to me, so I may bless them.' Now, Israel's eyes were failing because of old age, and he could hardly see. So Joseph brought his sons close to him, and his father kissed them and embraced them. Israel said to Joseph, 'I never expected to see your face again, and now God has allowed me to see your children too.' Then Joseph removed them from Israel's knees and bowed down with his face to the ground. And Joseph took both of them, Ephraim on his right toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh on his left toward Israel's right hand, and brought them close to him. But Israel reached out his right hand and put it on Ephraim's head, though he was the younger. And crossing his arms, he put his left hand on Manasseh's head, even though Manasseh was the firstborn. Then he blessed Joseph and said, 'May the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked faithfully, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has delivered me from all harm, may he bless these boys. May they be called by my name and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they increase greatly on the earth.' Then, when Joseph saw his father placing his right hand on Ephraim's head, he was displeased. So he took hold of his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Joseph said to him, 'No, my father, this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head.' But his father refused and said, 'I know, my son, I know. He too will become a people, and he too will become great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a group of nations.' He blessed them that day and said, 'In your name will Israel pronounce this blessing. May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh.' So he put Ephraim ahead of Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, 'I am about to die, but God will be with you and take you back to the land of your fathers. And you I give one more ridge of land than to your brothers, the ridge I took for the Amorites with my sword and my bow.'" So here in this chapter we have the blessing of Manasseh and Ephraim. But not only that, we get a little bit of a recount or a telling of Jacob's, also called Israel in this section, his story and how God had been faithful to him just as he had learned to be faithful to God. And he's charging Joseph, his son, and Joseph's sons, his grandchildren, with the same obedience, to be faithful to the Lord and to carry on what God's promise and covenant was with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, now going on to the descendants of Jacob. And we see the promise spreading out further and further and further. And one day we know, as we learned way back in the beginning of Genesis, that the blessing is going to extend to all people. All the nations of the world are going to be blessed through the promise and the covenant that God made with Abraham. And we're already starting to see that go out and out and out. But we see here that he tells the story to Joseph of how God promised to bless them and to make them a community of peoples and to give them the land of Canaan as an everlasting possession to his descendants. Which is an important thing to keep in mind because we know, if you've ever read the book of Exodus, that the Israelite people are about to go through a very difficult time. After Joseph, there's going to one day be a Pharaoh who does not remember Joseph, doesn't remember all the good things that the people of Israel had done, and he's going to enslave them and treat them harshly. And God's going to bring them out of Egypt, but it's going to look very dark for many, many years. But they can take solace in the fact that God has promised them this amazing covenant to give them this everlasting possession of the land of Canaan. He is going to do an amazing thing, and so that is an important thing to keep in the back of our minds as we move forward and see some very difficult times that the Israelites are going to go through. He reminds Joseph of God's faithfulness and what God has done, and then he gets to embrace Joseph's children, his grandchildren. And he is very, very happy and appreciative of what God has done. He says, I never expected to see your face again, talking to Joseph, and now God has allowed me to see your children too. So once again, he is pointing to the Lord. After we saw his very troubled early life as a young adult and someone who was not the great upstanding man he is now, he's learned a lot over his years, and he's learned to give credit to whom credit is due, to give credit to God, and he points to God in all these different situations. Once again, here is another one where he is pointing to God for the blessing of getting to see his son, his favorite son, Joseph again, and not only get to see him, but to see his own children, his grandsons, and really to get to enjoy that before he died. Something he had lost hope in, something he thought would never, never happen, and he is giving God the credit. And that challenges me when I read it. Am I giving God the credit in my own life when God does amazing things that I do not expect in my own life? Am I like Jacob, pointing to, look what God has done. Even though I thought this was going to happen, God did something else even better instead, and he turned a dark situation into a very great situation. And it's a good reminder for all of us to make sure that we are pointing to God and giving him credit and giving him praise and thanks for what he does, even when our lives are difficult. Because if you remember last week, he acknowledged the fact that his life, which he called was a pilgrimage, he called that very difficult, that it had been very hard. It's the same for each of us. We have very, very hard lives that we have to live on this earth. We have difficulties and hardships abundant all throughout our life. But if we can get past that and get to the point of being like Jacob here, where he looks and he says, God has blessed me. God's given me these things. He has been faithful. He has taken care of me through the years. That's where we want to be in life, where we're able to point people to the Lord. Let me get to the very complicated part of the story of Manasseh and Ephraim and the blessing, and how Joseph is so sure that his father Jacob needs to bless the firstborn more than the younger one. And again, we have this very difficult fiasco, because all throughout the story of these patriarchs, we've seen favoritism and how that's gone wrong, and we've seen some very complicated family issues. Here is just one more. He thinks that his firstborn son needs to be blessed, but Jacob says, nope, he's going to be an awesome person too. He's going to get to be very blessed by God, but nevertheless, the younger one is going to be greater than him. And again, this just shows that God does things very differently than you and I do things. Sometimes we get in a rut and we get stuck in a pattern where we think God is only going to work a certain way. God is only going to do things the way we think in our little box of what God would do. But God often chooses to use different people than we would think, in different ways we would think, to accomplish totally different things than we think he's going to do. And this is just one more symbolism of that God is able to take the younger instead of the older and raise up those who we think would be humble and raise them up. And again, just showing the incredible way that God writes our story, and he does an amazing job of doing things differently. And we need to watch for that and see where God is moving, and not just say that God is only going to work a certain way. This has to be this way. We need to see what God's doing and follow that. Then we see here, he blesses both of them and says that they're going to be so blessed that one day Israel is going to pronounce this blessing: may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. What an incredible blessing for Joseph's children. Really kind of tying up Joseph's very difficult life. That he's had a very, very difficult life. He was a slave. He was thrown into prison. He had all these different hardships, and now his own children are being included in the patriarchal line, and they're going to be in the tribes of Israel, and they're going to get this great honor, really giving a huge honor to Joseph, that both of his sons here were included in that genealogy. And it's a huge, huge blessing. They are going to be elevated to a great level. Once again, just showing how God is able to take our dark moments and make amazing things happen, and just do things that we could not have imagined, because Joseph could not have imagined this. Jacob could not have imagined this way back when we first were introduced to Joseph in the first chapter. And then he says that he is going to give Joseph one more ridge of land than his other brothers, the ridge that he took from the Amorites with my sword and my bow. But not only does he tell him that and give him that blessing, he says, I am about to die, but God will be with you and take you back to the land of your fathers. And this is the key point in the final moments of this chapter, that before Jacob dies, called Israel in this section here, he's pointing once again to God and what God is going to do in the future. Because like I said earlier in this episode, God is going to allow the Israelites to go through a very, very difficult time. But he's already promised that he is going to bring them through it, and they're going to be even greater because of that. So they're going to become a numerous, numerous people, and he is going to do something amazing. But what Jacob is doing here is he is once again putting the focus on what God is going to do, what he has promised, and that God will take care of his people as he's promised. And that's the same promise that you and I have, that God is going to take care of us. He's going to lead us through the difficult times if we will just put our trust and our hope and our faith in him. Well, I hope you've been challenged by this week, and that you will join us next week as we continue on in Genesis chapter 49 on From the Beginning, here on Heavenward Thinking.